Is the relationship between the US and Saudi Arabia falling apart? The State Department shows support for a former Saudi intelligence agent who says that the Crown Prince wants him dead. Will President Donald Trump be forced to stop supporting Mohammed Bin Salman? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Adrian Finighan. What's reported to be a foiled murder plot is putting further strain on the relationship between Saudi Arabia and the United States. A former Saudi intelligence agent is suing the Saudi Crown Prince in the US. Saad Al Jabri says that Mohammed Bin Salman sent the same so-called hit squad that murdered Jamal Khashoggi to kill him in Canada. In a rare rebuke of the kingdom, the State Department praised Jabri and demanded answers about the safety of his children who went missing in Saudi Arabia in March. It's the latest test of President Donald Trump's staunch support for Bin Salman. Al Jazeera's Mike Hanna reports from Washington.
Patrick Leahy was one of 4 senators who sent a letter to the White House last month. In the letter, the senators expressed their concern about what they call the abduction in Saudi Arabia of Saad Al Jabri's son and daughter. In his court filing, Al Jabri said his children, now aged 20 and 21, were being held as what he called human bait to lure him out of hiding. The State Department has now responded to the senators' concerns. In a letter to Senator Leahy, it describes Saad Al Jabri as a valued partner to the US government, working closely with the US to ensure the safety of Americans and Saudis. It also states that any persecution of Al Jabri's family members is unacceptable, adding that it has made repeated requests to the Saudi government about the status of his son and daughter. Al Jabri was an advisor to the previous Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Nayef. But in his court filing, he says he left Saudi Arabia because he feared what would happen if and when Mohammed bin Salman took over. The State Department says it's concerned about the alleged activities that resulted in Al Jabri's exile to Canada. It says that any Saudi accusations of wrongdoing against him must be, and I quote, addressed through established legal channels with full transparency and respect for the rule of law. Interpol rejected a Saudi request for Al Jabri's arrest, saying it was rooted in political and not criminal grounds. President Trump has continued to express his support for the Saudi Crown Prince, despite the repeated allegations of human rights violations, describing him as an ally and friend. But increasingly, this is very much at odds with the prevailing view in Congress. Mike Hanna, Al Jazeera, Washington.
Let's bring in our panel for today's discussion. Joining us from Washington, D.C., Khalil Jahshan, Executive Director of the Arab Center, Washington, D.C. Here in Doha, Mahjoob Zweiri, Director of the Gulf Studies Center at Qatar University. And from Boston in the U.S., Rami Khouri, Senior Fellow at the Issam Institute at the American University of Beirut. Gentlemen, welcome to you all. Rami, let's start with you. Is the U.S.-Saudi relationship unraveling? What are we to make of the State Department's comments?
The relationship is definitely in a serious process of transition and change after 75 years or so of pretty strong stability. In which direction it goes is going to depend on how the Saudis behave, and it's going to depend on how political winds in the United States change as well, particularly in the Congress and especially in the White House. The Saudi-U.S. relationship now is very, very narrow in terms of its links to the White House, and particularly to Kushner and Trump individually. So it's a very thin relationship compared to what it used to be before. But it is definitely in a moment of historic change. And it could get better, it could get worse, depends on how people behave.
Mahjoob Zweiri here in Doha. What about the State Department's comments? What do you make of that?
You know, at the end of the day, I think there was political pressure after the whole case brought to the court by Saad Al Jabri. And The Department of State cannot stay silent, and they have to respond. As the role of establishments has been basically marginalized under Trump administration. But it does seem that Pompeo tried to do something in order to pressure the Saudis to act quickly so they can avoid more pressure from the Congress. So I do read the statement by the Department of State as a gesture of help to the Saudis to do something so they can avoid the worst, which could come anytime.
Khalil, Jahshan, to what extent is the White House at the moment being forced to change tack in its dealings with Saudi Arabia, or even to keep quiet by Congress and by public opinion in the US and elsewhere?
Let me put it this way. Definitely the administration, Mr. Trump's administration, is beginning to feel the pressure in this regard from the media, from human rights organizations, from the Congress, etc. But I don't think that the pressure reached the level of forcing the administration to reassess any aspect of its policies vis-a-vis Saudi Arabia. They're being careful. They are definitely applying some pressure on the Saudis to kind of help themselves, if you will, with Congress, warning them that if they continue on this path, they're going to create more opposition for better relationships between Washington and Riyadh, particularly in terms of arms sales and what have you, which is the core of the bilateral relationship that is beginning to suffer as a result of behavior that is not seen as democratic or as welcome here in the United States.
Rami, Khouri, what do you think is going on behind the scenes between the White House and Saudi Arabia? Is it business as usual? Is the White House continuing to pursue the policy that came in with President Trump's arrival at the White House, or do you think that the White House is under pressure at the moment to change tack on Saudi Arabia?
The White House is under some pressure. As Khalil said, I think correctly, the pressure is there, but it's not enough to bring about a significant change yet. Trump doesn't listen much to public opinion. He feels he can carry out bilateral relations using executive orders and defense policy measures and things of that nature. It's a transactional process for Trump. It's not an ideological process. So my guess is that behind the scenes, there are discussions going on between the Saudis and the Americans, but neither of them in this relationship are very good at nuanced diplomatic and political developments. The problem for both of them is that the Saudis are being criticized in the U.S., in public and in private, very much for their internal and regional behavior. It's not about the 1973 oil embargo or just the crash in oil prices last year, which are there, of course, but their human rights record, their Qatar embargo, their Yemen war, mistreating the Lebanese prime minister, assassinating people. The latest accusations by Saad Al Jabri are very powerful new elements. So they're being, for the first time ever, in a sustained way, the Saudis are being evaluated in public in the United States and in the Congress according to their morality, not just according to the amount of oil they pump. And this is new, and the Saudis don't know how to deal with this. The Saudis have proved to be broadly incompetent at foreign policy and warfare, as we see in the Middle East. And they thought in the past they could buy this off with lobbyists by going to ranches in Texas where the president was and things like that, but they can't do that anymore.
On that note, Mahjoob Zweiri, what then is the aim of the Saad Al Jabri lawsuit and its implications for Saudi Arabia? Is it to add fuel to the fire of the Khashoggi controversy, to further discredit the Crown Prince, both globally and in the US?
I would add to what Rami was saying. I think the Saudis is becoming a headache to the American administration. This in particular administration wants, a player who can add, who can help, not creating a problem or being a troublemaker. Saudis at the moment, since 2015, has become basically a troublemaker to the Americans, and the American has to be the fireman to solve their problems. So in this context, the assassination of Jamal Khashoggi, which basically was, I think the Saudis miscalculated everything about the whole story. They assumed that everything will be, hidden in 24 hours. Nobody will follow up on that. But everything has become, the main story until now, since it happened. And now with the Jabris bringing more information about this, adding more details, confirming what is being said, what's being alleged, what's being said, that's maybe now he's saying actually it did happen, actually is putting the Saudis under pressure and putting even the White House under pressure, especially at the time now where Trump is focusing on his campaign, waiting for the 20th of November elections. So he does not want anything to be added to his plate. His plate already full. He's bothered by his situation inside the United States with the corona, with also the story inside the United States. So this Al Jabri story is adding more fuel to the fire which already there, and actually putting pressure on the Saudis and on the administration as well. And that is the reason to me why the Department of State said something, because they wanted to reduce the pressure on the White House in particular.
Khalil, Jahshan, do you agree with that?
I definitely do. I would just like to add that, first of all, in terms of being of added value or not, I mean, this administration is on a very good relationship with the elite, the ruling elite in Saudi Arabia, but they feel somewhat pressured, somewhat embarrassed by the fact that they are facing again a repeat of the Jamal Khashoggi affair. I think personally that the administration realized that the Saudis were involved and MBS was involved in the assassination of Jamal Khashoggi, and they covered for him. And they feel that they have been successful in protecting him. And to see this case with some similar, not quite the same, but similar kind of outlines, if you will, violating international law, going after a dissident overseas, attempt to assassinate one more time, I think some people in the administration became nervous as a result of that. And that's why they tend to see the Saudi government at this time as being a nuisance, as being a burden, rather than a strong ally. But the relationship has never been, at least by American public opinion, as a long observer of the bilateral relationship, I would say that the foreign policy elite in Riyadh and Jeddah always was frustrated with the fact that the American public did not take the relationship, even though it's 70 years plus in age and has worked for both sides in many ways, but it has never been, from a Saudi perspective, elevated to the level of a strategic alliance the way they wish.
I want to come on in just a moment to what a future US-Saudi relationship might look like under a potential President Biden. But first, one more question on the current relationship. Rami, Khouri, a cross-party bill introduced by US senators this week aims to prevent President Trump bypassing a ban on armed drone sales so that he won't be able to sell such equipment to nations like Saudi Arabia and the UAE after US-made weapons were found to have been used against civilians in Yemen. I mean, what does that tell us about the changing nature of the relationship between Saudi and the US? Is it more of the same? Is it what we've been talking about already here?
It tells us several important things, and I want to add, follow up what Khalil said. It tells us that the relationship is being adjudicated or negotiated more and more in the courts of law and in the chambers of Congress, whereas before it was in public relations and on TV, which had little impact. An American TV doesn't have a huge amount of impact on Saudi foreign policy. But now you're dealing with congressional laws, and these are and it's getting a little bit more bipartisan. Of course, Trump can always veto any resolution, which he will. So the congressional resolution is a signal that the impatience with Saudi behavior is growing. But the real problem the Saudis have is with the Jabri case, with Khashoggi's investigation, the murder of assassination of Khashoggi being investigated by the UN Human Rights Council with a very serious international investigation. These are instruments of the rule of law. And the Saudis are totally lost in the world of the rule of law. They only operate according to personal relationships and things like that. And most of what the Saudi leadership under Mohammed Bin Salman, most of what they've done has gone against internationally accepted standards of decent human behavior enshrined in the rule of law, whether it's behavior in Yemen or Qatar or assassinating people, putting people in jail, like the many people who were put in the Ritz-Carlton, and now you have many, a woman particularly. So this is the real problem. Every one of these incidents ratchets up the trend of taking the American-Saudi relationship into the chambers of Congress and into the chambers of courts. And the Saudis are going to lose there.
And just briefly, you wanted to pick up on something that Khalil was saying?
No, that's what I want
okay.
to say. Basically, that the shift towards the law is really a problem for the Saudis, and they don't know how to deal with it.
Okay, Mahjoob, we talked about how the US is perhaps changing its view of Saudi Arabia, but to what extent is Saudi Arabia right now hedging its bets ahead of November's elections as far as its relationship with the US is concerned?
It's important to remind the viewers that Saudis, especially King Salman and his son, they actually invested in Trump administration. Even before, when he was a candidate, they bet that they wanted him because basically Saudis under Barack Obama's administration, they were marginalized. Let's not forget the frustration of the Saudis because of the nuclear deal with Iran and how the Saudis perceive that. So basically, they have a major problem with the Democrats, and the 8 years of Barack Obama to them were nightmare. So that's the reason why they invested in Trump. And that's the reason why they try to push as much as they can so he basically act against Iran, try to weaken Iran. Now, if Biden came end of 2020 or beginning of 2021, that nightmare will come back, but with more Saudi, with more marginalization, with more international pressure, with more economic weaknesses, with more internal weaknesses inside the Saudi society. So if Democrats came, more challenges will be ahead to the Saudis, regardless how much Biden can put pressure in reality. Okay. But even having Biden in the White House will be nightmare to the Saudis.
Khalil, do you agree with that? I mean, how would the relationship, indeed US Middle East policy in general, change under a President Biden?
I think it will see a lot of changes. Frankly, Mahjoob was right. The turning point was the Obama administration, the deterioration of the bilateral relationship, the racist tone of the Saudi attitude toward Obama was very public and very humiliating and was taken very seriously by the government at the time here in Washington, and left bad taste, particularly, of course, with the Democrats. Now, historically, the relationship between the Saudis and the Democrats have never been as friendly as it was with the Republican side. The Saudis have always, as long as I could remember, more than 40 years of focusing on this relationship, the Saudis have always preferred a Republican in the White House, mostly for defense and arms sales and strategic reasons rather than political reasons. And that was never appreciated by the Democrats. But it has now come to a kind of a head start, to a clash, if you will. And definitely when you read between the lines in terms of the platform of the party that was recently discussed, some of the statements made by Biden and his advisors, the relationship is going to see some tougher days in the future should the Democrats win in November. And definitely the Saudis are not helping. I mean, every person that is agitating right now to influence the elections and their attempt to influence the elections are as intense as those of Russia or China or anybody else, frankly. The Saudis and the Emiratis are extremely involved in trying to impact U.S. elections in November. And their preference is very clear. They would like to see their honeymoon with Trump, personal honeymoon with Trump, extended for more years.
Rami, if that doesn't happen, if we do have a President Biden after November, is there a danger that if the relationship between the US and Saudi cools, Saudi Arabia may turn towards Russia or China?
Saudi Arabia is already expanding its strategic and commercial and military relationships, and with talking to the Russia and energy relationships with the Russians, the Chinese, Indians, people all over the world. So that's already happening. People realize that you can no longer just depend on one person, particularly when you get a fickle president like Trump, who makes decisions based on what he saw on right-wing newscasts that morning. So yes, there is that possibility, but they're already trying to do that. But Khalil raised an important point when he just slipped in there, the Emiratis with the Saudis. A lot of what the Saudis are doing is driven by Mohammed Bin Zayed, the crown prince and effective ruler of the United Arab Emirates. And the two crown princes of the Emirates and Saudi Arabia are driven by a hysterical fear about what happened starting in 2010 in southwestern Tunisia, when Arab citizens started demonstrating. Eventually, people were overthrown. Democratic elections were held. Muslim Brothers came to power in one or two places. And so Mohammed bin Zayed is the real driving force for many of the Saudi policies, which are, in fact, criminal in nature and destructive and mostly failures. So the Emiratis and the Saudis are not very good at policy making beyond their borders. And internally, they're becoming more repressive and intolerant, and you see a parallel movement among both of them. So I think this is an important thing to watch. For the Americans, Saudi Arabia will always be important because it is so big, it is so rich, it influences other people, and it provides a fulcrum for many of their actions in the Middle East. Their big base is in Qatar, so they don't particularly need it for military reasons, but it will always be an important ally. But they've never figured out, the Americans have never figured out how to use allies. They think that you can get the Saudis and Pakistanis and others to fight the Iranians, and they've failed. Iranian influence has increased in the last 20 years under American pressure. So there are many wider issues than just the bilateral relationship.
Okay, and Mahjoob, very briefly, I've only got about a minute left here. If Joe Biden became president, do you think he would revisit the Khashoggi murder and hold the Crown Prince publicly accountable? Maybe a naive question, but do you think that is part of what drives Saudi fear at the moment?
I think there will be more, I would say there will be more political pressure when it comes to Khashoggi's story, when it comes to the human rights issue, when it comes to the even some policies in the region concerning Iran, Yemen, and other stories. There will be more political pressure on Saudi Arabia.
Okay, gentlemen, there, I'm afraid we must end it. We're out of time. Thank you all, Khalil Jahshan, Mahjoob Zweiri, and Rami Khouri for being on the programme with us today. As always, thank you for watching. Don't forget, you can see the programme again at any time just by going to the website. You'll find that at aljazeera.com. For further discussion, why not join us at our Facebook page? That's at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And you can join the conversation on Twitter. We are at AJ Inside Story. From me, Adrian Finighan, and the team here in Doha, thanks for being with us. I'll see you again. Bye for now.